would Tom Brady have been successful in every era of football?
You know what's so hard about that? It's hard to say that the greatest player of all time couldn't have been. And I mean, when you go back and you watch Joe Montana, right, who before Tom Brady was sort of the depiction, right, the definition of excellence and success at that position. Like Joe wasn't running around people and he wasn't super athletic. He didn't have this cannon arm. He wasn't John Elway, but he found ways to be successful. He was extremely clutch. He was able to anticipate, able to play. So I do believe that Tom Brady can play in any era. I don't know if Tom Brady would have been this man in any era. I don't know if he turns into what he turns into without learning some of those things he did learn from Bill Belichick early on in his career. And the way I kind of put it was like Aaron Rodgers to me, when we talk about the generational talents of our era, right? The 2000s, right? The millennium, Aaron Rodgers is that generational talent to me.
Yeah.
Because we would play Tom, bro, and Tom would pick us apart, and Tom knew exactly where the blitz was coming from or where the hole in the coverage was. We had Aaron fooled in the Super Bowl. There were plays that he didn't know where we were coming from, and we flashed in front of a guy or we were in a guy's hip pocket. He had so much arm talent, we just couldn't do anything about it. We knew what plays were coming. We knew where he was going. We anticipated all of those things, but he was just so talented, we couldn't fix it.
Yeah.
Michael Vick had a little bit of this. Cam Newton had some of this. Now when we see Patrick Mahomes, you see Lamar Jackson, they have parts of this, right? But it's about evolution. Someone you were really close to, Kevin Durant, right? I think Kevin Durant is a generational talent.
Yeah.
People are going to see Kevin Durant differently now because there's a Victor Wembanyama,
Yeah.
right? And they're going to be like, well, he can do some of those similar things and he's plus 7 foot. But until we saw Kevin Durant, no one had ever done that. No one had that sort of handle, that sort of body control, could utilize the court in so many ways and be 7 foot, right?
Yeah.
LeBron James is another person who that big, that solid, that fast, that much explosion. Those are the players I'm speaking of when I think generational talent. Now, if we want to talk generational careers, if we want to talk bested positions, greatest of all times, I believe those are different conversations, which Tom Brady, which Peyton Manning, which Drew Brees, and those guys are a part of. But a generational talent, man, is somebody like you say to yourself, if all else fails and strategy doesn't work, and we're not talking about X's and O's, and we just rolled a football or a basketball or baseball out there and told them to go do it, they had the baseline talent to do it. And I think that was the conversation I was having over who was a really good football player.
Yeah. It's funny. You mentioned the thing about KD. I also found this like other category that we started talking about, which is like players that created a prototype. So like I would say KD created a prototype without question. Victor Wembanyama may be 7'5" and do similar things, but the first time we saw somebody at that size with that type of handle playing that type of game was KD. You could even say that LeBron was this incredible evolved version of Magic even. Right? You could say that he's, and without not taking anything away from the fact that LeBron could be the greatest ever, but it was an evolved version of Magic. Kobe was obviously an evolved version of MJ. But I think that in football, is there examples like LT was probably a prototype of a linebacker? And then does that mean that LT could have dominated in today's day? Has the evolution of all of these eras just changed? When you watch football now, do you feel like some of the players you played with would still be how good they were today, or does it just change?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of those players would still be good. I don't think the game has evolved to that point. Like we often laugh when they compare eras and you talk about like guys like Bob Cousy, and we say like he dribbles down the left side of the court with the ball in his right hand. Or the fact that like, Wilt Chamberlain was out there with guys that were my height. And we always say those things, but certain players transcend time. They transcend years. They transcend generations. They transcend eras. You look at a guy like Troy Polamalu, who I play with. Troy Polamalu is the best strong safety in football, no matter what era he plays in. If you play in this game right now, he's going to open field tackle. He's going to blitz. He's going to be extremely intelligent. He's going to have the quickest first step of any safety in football, which he did at that same time. Like those things just don't go away. I played with Sean Taylor. I believe the exact same thing about him. We're talking 6'2", 230 pounds, 4.4 speed, long arms, mean as hell, great ball skills. He's going to be great in any era. You know, Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss, Adrian Peterson. You think about my teams, you know, the James Harrisons, the Casey Hamptons, the Brett Kiesels. I think all of those players would find ways to be extremely good in any era. Football hasn't changed to me as much as some of the other sports have evolved, in the sense that, like, if you can run the ball, you can run the ball yesterday, today, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Marshawn Lynch would have been a bad man back in the day. He was a bad man during his day. They'd have hell tackling him now.
Yeah.
And so I think that all of those things can be the same, but there are certain players whose skill sets are different, right? Like we look at, like you talk about prototypes. I don't know if Steph Curry created a prototype based on the way his physical stature presents to you, but he did create an entire style of playing basketball.
Yep.
Now, say to ourselves, if Steph Curry played in the 90s, right? One, the game was so slow, he wouldn't get that amount of three-pointers up, those amount of shots, right? It would be hand checking. It would be different things as he flows through the lane. Like, does that style necessarily translate to an era? I think is a different conversation than thinking about the actual physical tools of a football player or a basketball player, baseball player, because you could develop the skill, in my opinion, for the generation.
You know, it's funny because the eras in the 90s talk about like how physical basketball was. You know, they'll always say like they never would have come down the lane without getting elbowed in the face. And that was probably true. But they also didn't guard you 25, 30 feet out. So you know what I'm saying? They waited till you got in the lane. Steph would have just sat at the 3-point line and had wide open looks probably half the time.
Yeah, and I think that's always like the GOAT conversation and why those things are so difficult.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, Rich? Because we're thinking of Michael Jordan. And, you know, I love when like some 18-year-old kid that's a YouTuber watches Michael Jordan highlights live, because you do realize that like all of these things that he was able to do, the hang time in the air, the layup package, right? The handle, like all of those things at that time were actually new.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Kobe being like this evolved version of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan did crossovers, or Michael Jordan learned the post up or the turnaround just because he was reacting. And then because of Michael Jordan, now there are trainers who teach those things.
Yeah.
The people you go to in the offseason and say, hey, this is a move that we can work on, but you're working on it because Michael Jordan got a basketball one day and it just happened. And so I think the same thing happens in football. That same thing happens in baseball, right? There are people who are looking at who Barry Bonds was and the way that he played as a 5-tool player, and now they're trying to do that. The next will be Shohei Ohtani. And so I think as evolution happens, like you said with KD, we see these different things, but there was always a first one.
Yeah.
And I think the first one is always special. You mentioned Lawrence Taylor. Well, here's Michael Parsons.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, without question. And to your Sean Taylor point, like he started that prototype for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're talking about quarterbacks. You mentioned Lamar. I feel like it's an incredible time for quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And I go back and forth on the idea of like who I really think the best quarterback in the league was. I think for a few years it was clearly Patrick Mahomes, but it's definitely a debate now, right? Like I'm torn whether I would choose Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar. I don't even know if I have Patrick Mahomes in that right now today. If you were starting a franchise today, I know it sounds crazy, but I just don't know if I have him. And obviously I'm putting aside, this isn't about body of work. I'm not judging him. He's clearly the best in that regard. But if I just had to start a franchise today, I don't know if I'm taking him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to ignore history. It's hard to ignore the clutch gene. And I think that's the difficult part because, you definitely 2 years ago when Lamar won the MVP and they were number one in the AFC, I was like, yeah, man, like Lamar has surpassed Patrick Mahomes. Like I'm saying this, right? Because they weren't explosive on offense. It wasn't that. And then he goes into Baltimore and he makes the big play to MVS down the field, and Lamar kind of sputters. And then you have last year, right? Josh Allen, the MVP,
Yep.
right? I felt like he was one, then Lamar's two. That's how the voting went. And so Josh Allen, he goes into Kansas City. He has an opportunity to beat Patrick Mahomes, but then again, Patrick Mahomes makes the plays to win. And so I just think it's so difficult to sort of figure out who you would want to take. But this is what I do say about it. The gap has closed 100%. Josh Allen's closed the gap. Joe Burrow, obviously, Lamar Jackson. But we always have to remember that Patrick Mahomes started out so much higher than everybody else. From the first time we saw Patrick Mahomes, he was the best football player in the NFL. He threw 50 touchdowns in his first year starting. He went to the AFC Championship in his first year starting. In the second year, he's the Super Bowl MVP and a Super Bowl champion. I think you almost get desensitized to that level of greatness. And when people start to close the gap, we almost use it as something that's negative about the guy that's number one, rather than talking about the positive gains of the other people because they had more room to go to reach their ceiling. When you're KD, when you're LeBron James, when you're when you're Stephen Curry, right? It's like, how much better can you actually get?
Yeah.
Right? Like how much better do you get than 50 touchdowns, MVP in the AFC Championship? Other than like doing that every single year, which is an impossibility. And so to me, it's still Patrick Mahomes. To me, I still pick Patrick Mahomes. I feel like you drop Patrick Mahomes in any situation with any team, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback for that team. And I think it's going to take somebody to be consistently as good individually and have that level of team success before I think differently.
Man, you're good because I'm very it's tough to sway me, especially that quickly. But that argument is very clear, and I would imagine that there's still some of his best football potentially in front of him, right? If you look at quarterbacks' trajectories, when you play 15, 18 years, you go through these ups and downs. But at 30 years old, I mean, some of his best years could potentially still be in front of him even.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you know this too, though, Rich. What happens is as the competition gets better, it's harder to dominate in the same way.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Joe's a dog. Lamar's a dog. Josh is a dog. Like at some point, it has to be their time or their year. We've already seen Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals beat them. But think about Tom Brady. Tom Brady had these two separate careers that were both Hall of Fame careers. He had this start where he wasn't the guy.
Yeah.
But he still won 3 championships. He had a back-to-back Super Bowl. And then there was this phase in between where he was by far the best player in the world, and they weren't winning championships because of damn Eli.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's okay, he had that phase, and then you backdoor that with another run of winning 3 Super Bowls. And you put the icing on the cake by leaving, going to Tampa Bay, and then becoming a Super Bowl champion for the 7th time. And so I think that Patrick Mahomes has another run in him. What's going to be interesting to watch, though, is in between those runs, right? Is there a time in between there where we start to believe that somebody's better, where there's a team that not necessarily becomes a dynasty, but there's a team that becomes dominant, right? Because we've seen them 2 times and nobody's having this discussion, and I'm not having it either. Jalen Hurts is not going to be in a discussion for the best quarterback in the league. But there's been 2 times that those two have faced off in the biggest game of the year, and Jalen Hurts has actually been better. Yeah. And so you wonder if there's going to be somebody in the AFC that creeps up and does that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Trevor Lawrence, somebody that I think everyone thought would have more at this point in his career. Is there still stuff that you see on film that you believe that is possible?
Yeah, like dude is uber talented.
Yeah.
Uber talented. I think though, to our earlier conversation, Rich, about generational talents, I met Trevor Lawrence when he was in high school. And I remember looking at him and saying, that's exactly what it looks like. You know, he was 6'5", he was long, lean, he could make every single throw, the velocity, the spiral, the spin, goes right into Clemson and starts. He was, in everybody's mind, at least at that point, a generational can't miss talent.
Yeah.
Right? You get Doug, like, let's be honest, bro. The Urban Meyer stuff, we might as well just taken away a year of that man's life of improving, improving, ascension, any of those things, learning, growing. And so then with Doug Peterson, you felt like you got it. You felt like he'd reached it. They get the win over the Chargers in the playoffs. They go to the second round. He was supposed to take those next steps, and he didn't. So was it the people around him? Was it the staff? What kept Trevor Lawrence from taking that next step? And can Liam Cohen figure it out? And so we'll see going forward. There are things on film that says that he can be what everybody expected him to be. But if in my opinion, it's more some of the intangible things that he needs to continue to do from a leadership standpoint, from a belief standpoint, from a confidence in who he is standpoint that gets him over the hump. It's nothing that has to do with physical traits.
And Justin Herbert is one of those ones too.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Listen, people got upset with me because they asked me who needed a bigger game, first game, Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes. And I was like, Justin Herbert, right? Because we've seen Patrick Mahomes do this so many times. And, I was entertaining and like having some fun about things that Justin Herbert could do, being handsome, all those things. And, people get their panties all in a ruffle. But the dude has everything. He's tall. He can run. He can move the pocket. He can make every single throw. He's physical. He's smart. I actually called one of my friends who I've trained, who I've known for a very long time, who's a Charger. I say, tell me about Justin Herbert. And he said, the thing I learned the most about him in training camp is that he's a dog. That was what I wanted to hear. That was what I needed to hear. And we saw some of that stuff early. This could be, along with the way Greg Roman has started utilizing him, what we saw in game one, this could be Justin Herbert's coming out year, the coming out party of people really starting to recognize how good he can be. But the point still stands. Whether it's college, this is not a guy with all that talent who won a national championship. We talk about the NFL. This is not a guy who's won a playoff game. We're still waiting to see Justin Herbert do it on the biggest stage. And I think once he has that feather in his cap, you're going to start talking about him with those four guys you named early on in our conversation.